So we continue this adventure, this adventuring grace, this pilgrimage. And it's an ongoing irony, at least to me. I don't know if it is to you, or maybe paradox is a better word. And the paradox is that how is it that if we are presumably in relationship with a God who's desperate to lavish us with grace, how is it that at the end of any given day, we often find ourselves bereft of grace? And like most ideas like that, it reminds me of a story. And this story is from Kathleen Fasani, who is the former religion editor of the Chicago Sun-Times. And she came up with this idea of going to places in search of grace. So it's in a book, Sin Boldly, which I just love the title. And she goes in search of grace. And in this case, she goes to Mali. And friends of hers who knew she sort of carried her heart on her sleeve warned her. 3 friends, all separately, warned her, don't let them get to you. And what they were saying was, when you get to Mali, there's going to be a lot of kids who are suffering, and they're going to ask you for your shoes and for money and for your heart. And you just can't do it. It's just going to be too much. So you have to sort of protect yourself. So, for what it's worth, just don't let them get to you. So unbeknownst to herself, she went to Mali sort of like a Heisman Trophy, prepared to protect herself from anything getting to her. And she did okay for the first couple days. She ends up in a village, and while there with the chief of the village, a little boy comes up, climbs in her lap, uninvited, and scooches his little butt back, and then almost sensuously leans his head back over her shoulders. And instinctively, she just reaches around to hold the little boy. And alarmingly, she discovers that his skin is clammy. And she then feels his heart beating at an alarming rate, sort of backwards, like into her chest and breast. And then also unbeknownst to her, she starts to cry, only discovers it when she feels the dampness on her shirt. And then she holds the boy a little tighter. And then he scooches off her lap. She turns to her host, who's like, "What's with the boy?" And the host says, we only get medical attention maybe once a month, and they think his heart is actually estrangulated, but, there's nothing we can do. His parents died of AIDS. He's living with his grandfather. That night, she goes back to her sort of nice hotel, and she's up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it has nothing to do with indigestion. I don't remember when the last time you were up at 3 o'clock in the morning and had nothing to do with indigestion. She had one of those nights. All she could think about was the feel of that boy's skin and the feel of his heart beating at an alarming rate into her chest. She comes home, writes about him in her first article in the Sun-Times, gets all this response. "Hey, I'm a pediatric cardiosurgeon. If I could help at all, let me know. I'm a lawyer. If you need help getting the boy over here, I have more business miles on the plane than you can fathom. Make a long story short, which is obviously not one of my core competencies, the boy is in this country having his heart fixed a couple months later." And as Grace would have it, she finds herself in the exact same position with the boy as he's recovering in her home. He's on her lap. She's holding him. His skin is warm, and his heart is beating forward and at a peaceful pace. If you know her whole story, you know that it would make sense whether she would imagine becoming a mother or not. And while holding the boy, it becomes so clear to her that if she would ever have him, she would delight in being his mom. He wakes up, she tenders her invitation, they go ask the grandpa's delighted beyond measure. I think they live in California. I think the kid's in college. Here's the thing. If we are going to conclude this pilgrimage with grace, we have to let God get to us. And the paradox is that we're scared. Like, why would we refute God's grace? Because it's awkward, because it's vulnerable, because it'll take us places that we're not sure we're capable of going or that we can go. Grace is a treacherous adventure. That's why we called this an adventure in grace. Because we are in relationship with a God that wants to take us into love, which will surely be costly. But, oh, God, it'll be so good. And so, in the spirit of Kathleen Fasani and Jesus, I pray and I beg that we allow God to get to us, that we cooperate with a God that's desperate to drench us with God's very being, with God's grace. Thank you for the blisters. Thank you for walking. We'll see you at our next rest stop. And the church says,